sort of as we're sort of moving forward and talking about this, is less talking about democracy or more those specific stable connections, but instead the way that production is almost determined, what falls back on production, the thing that claims production for itself in these various forms of sort of existence socially. So with the first, it is the earth, the idea that the earth, from where and within what everything grows and builds, and we literally carve into it. You carve into it for crops. You carve into it to dig out pits. You carve into it to put down foundation. You wear it down in order to make paths. You literally can like see how the earth is recorded on, but also how it claims this, the way you give thanks to the earth for the bounty. The earth gave you the all of this, blah, 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 like that setup. As we make our move from that to the barbarian despotic machine, it is pieces of the earth continuing, but new machinery introduced or new interactions within that machinery that shifts how the lines of alliance and filiation, how social existence and these other things sort of play together. So as we're sort of moving forward, it's worth keeping in mind that this is not necessarily a wholly stable thing. Oh, this is the socius right there, I see it. But instead, this is about how production is appropriated and determined as a thing. So we'll make our way through. It will become more clear over time, of course, but we'll go ahead and, I guess, start it up. Let's continue from the beginning of the section because it'll help. I don't want to really start with really what is halfway through the next paragraph in the French. The founding of the despotic machine, or the barbarian socius, can be summarized in the following way: a new alliance and direct filiation. The despot challenges the lateral alliances and the extended filiations of the old community. He imposes a new alliance system and places himself in direct filiation with the deity. The people must follow. A leap into a new alliance. A break with the ancient filiation. This is expressed in a strange machine, or rather, a machine of the strange, whose locus is the desert, imposing the harshest and the most barren of ordeals, and attesting to the resistance of an old order as well as to the validation of the new order. The machine of the strange is both a great paranoiac machine, since it expresses the struggle with the old system, and already a glorious celibate machine, insofar as it exalts the triumph of a new alliance. The despot is the paranoiac. There is no longer any reason to forego such a treatment, once one has freed oneself from the characteristic familialism and the concept of paranoia in psychoanalysis and psychiatry, provided one sees in paranoia a type of investment of a social formation. New perverse groups spread the despot's invention. Perhaps they even fabricated it for him. They broadcast his fame and impose his power in the towns they found or conquer. Wherever a despot and his army pass, doctors, priests, scribes, and officials are part of this procession. It might be said that the ancient complementarity has shifted to form a new socius, no longer the bush paranoiac and the encampment of village perverts, but the desert paranoiac and the town perverts. We'll get into the desert and how this sort of operates that way. But again, this is the movement from one socius to another. This is the movement as sort of that continues. Okay. Is everyone following? Because I kind of want to dive right into the next so we can keep going. They're going to dive in and sort of explain and sort of dive through the way this formation works. The thing to keep in mind is, again, the extended familialism that was in the what they sort of refer to as the prehistoric or the primitive tribes, their extended filiation, where it was everyone's kind of involved in raising a child. It was not really an uncle or an aunt. There weren't really these determined locations, but instead really en masse, a lot of people in various related ways in complex ways in your family, combined with the alliances founded overall through the tribe through marriage, very much a sort of one-to-one, my daughter married this, they're a lot allied with us. We're marrying into these groups. This thing has shifted. We're no longer in this. It's now a new alliance, which we'll get to, and direct filiation instead of the extended. Those are the things to keep in mind as we go, because that's going to also shift again with capital. So it's important to keep that in mind. So everyone following so far? Any notes before I dive on in? Excellent.
Yeah, just with that. So again, notice that what's changing is how the line affiliative function here. So in the previous socius, like where the paragraph ends off, right? Notice that's coming back to the the bush or the earth, so to speak, and the encampment perverts, the village perverts, kind of a he and they kind of mindset, but the earth being the conditions for this in a manner of speaking, right? What's shifting is that now the despot is replacing in a sense, kind of replacing that, right? So the affiliation, the alliance are going to are changing on how they're conditioned, and the body on which they're written is changing, right? And in this case, because we went over this more, I'm not going to. I'm
Yeah.
just underlining stuff here. The other thing I would underline is notice that the despot is the paranoiac here. So
Yep.
paranoiac in the sense that Deleuze and Guattari use it. It's condensing. It's about exclusive disjunctions, right? It's not paranoid in the normal sense of looking over your shoulder.
Yes, there is no longer any reason to forego such a statement once one has freed oneself from the familialism of the concept and paranoia. They're very much saying you can see it immediately. One sees in paranoia a type of investment in social formation. I'm totally coming through you by the way, JK.
So what's the difference between the bush paranoid and the desert paranoid?
We'll get to the desert paranoiac very quickly here. I kind of want to leave that. If you could mute yourself real quick, JK.
Okay.
We'll get to the desert paranoia because that's the next. I mean, the next couple of paragraphs are sort of teasing that out. If we remember in the bush paranoiac and the encampment or village perverts was because you would have basically someone going out into the world and being very much in that space of direct interaction with the external world. Someone who's hunting is very much moment to moment, harshly invested in the overall, you could say, situation they're in. So this branch is cracked. This one over here, there's tracks. This over here, there's rabbit droppings, whatever it may be. But it's very much in line and sort of driving forward with that kind of immediate knowledge in a way with desire. This is the paranoiac, the bush paranoiac. Then on the other hand, when he returns, he's no longer a hunter. He may be literally anything. And this is where we get to the encampment or village perverts, the change, the sort of playing with those rules, the use of pervert in this sense is sort of the, you could say the sort of, I don't know, turning of that, and the lack of sort of direct, absolute and totality. Maybe, is that a fair way to put it, Jack?
How I'd approach it is just at a really basic level, right? Like the two socii are different. So for the village and for the bush, right? Kind of like Brooks is alluding to, right? It's coming from the earth, right? And that's important for how filiation is kind of understood, well, how it operates, right? Uh, whereas with the despot, the notice the earth is kind of drying up here, and yet at the same time, the despot has placed themselves in a certain relationship to the disjunction, right, to the second synthesis, and that's kind of the shift. Is the earth is no longer the master of that synthesis. The despot is.
So he mentions the nomad in some other context. Is a nomad closer to the bush paranoid than the desert paranoid?
It's actually much more in line with the desert paranoiac, but again, it's going to shift a bit because it isn't exactly that. The nomad exists in a slightly different way. Again, because we're talking about less the formation of any individual and more the overall social formations that allow that individual to exist as they do, or produces the individual to that behaves this way or acts this way, I think might be even a better way to put it. Does that make sense as a thing? No?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks.
All right. So I'll continue. Yeah, it's so Bats asks, it's close to the way capital operates. Closer is probably the word I wouldn't use for this. If you're getting to the idea that it has more pieces in it, more machinery in it that's similar to capitalism, yes, I think it's got a few more things that allow some things to be, but it's not closer in any sort of real sense. Because it is still, again, it is as a collective, it is its own as a socius. It is claiming in a very particular way. It has new pieces that make it more, has more similar pieces to capital, but again, it's not closer. It is still a distance from it, for sure. And like it's not like they're, I sort of understand. I live within capital. I sort of understand this one more than that. It's not really that. It's completely different subjectivities produced. So it's kind of tough to say closer. If that makes sense. Bats. Waiting for bats, and then we'll get moving. I'll just go ahead and start. We'll continue from there. In theory, the despotic barbarian formation has to be conceived of in terms of an opposition between it and the primitive territorial machine, the birth of an empire. But in reality, one can perceive the movement of this formation just as well when one empire breaks away from a preceding empire, or even when there arises the dream of a spiritual empire, wherever temporal empires fall into decadence. It may be that the enterprise is primarily military and motivated by conquest, or that it is primarily religious, the military discipline being converted into an internal asceticism and cohesion. It may be that the paranoiac himself is either a gentle creature or a raging beast, but we always rediscover the figures of this paranoiac and his perverts, the conqueror and his elite troops, the despot and his bureaucrats, the holy man and his disciples, the anchorite and his monks, Christ and his St. Paul. Moses flees from the Egyptian machine into the wilderness and installs his new machine there, a holy ark and a portable temple, and gives his people a new religious military organization. In order to summarize St. John the Baptist's enterprise, one author declares, quote, John attacks at its foundation the central doctrine of Judaism, the doctrine of the alliance with God through affiliation that goes back to Abraham, end quote. There is the essential. Every time the categories of a new alliance and direct affiliation are mobilized, we are talking about the imperial barbarian formation or the despotic machine. And this holds true whatever the context of this mobilization, whether in a relationship with preceding empires or not, since throughout these vicissitudes, the imperial formation is always defined by a certain type of code and inscription that is in direct opposition to the primitive territorial codings. The number of elements in the alliance makes little difference. New alliance and direct affiliation are specific categories that testify to the existence of a new socius, irreducible to the lateral alliances and the extended filiations, that declined the primitive machine. It is this force of projection that defines paranoia, this strength to start again from zero, to objectify a complete transformation. The subject leaps outside the intersections of alliance filiation, installs himself at the limit, at the horizon, in the desert, the subject of a deterritorialized knowledge that links him directly to God and connects him to the people. For the first time, something has been withdrawn from life and from the earth that will make it possible to judge life and survey the earth from above. A first principle of paranoiac knowledge. The whole relative play of alliances and filiations is carried to this absolute in this new alliance and this direct filiation. There is so much here to go over every fucking time. This paragraph.
Yeah, it's a mega paragraph.
Yeah, there's just a lot that we can dive into, honestly. So it's kind of tough.
Well, we can kind of chunk the first bit, right? I mean, in theory, the despotic barbarian is conceived of. So in theory, this new socius is conceived in opposition between itself and the earth, right? And that's the birth of an empire. So what they're saying is normally we think of the despotic as opposed to the earth, and that's what the empire gives you. But in reality, it's just a movement of formation. So when one empire breaks away from a preceding empire, or when there arises the dream of a spiritual empire, wherever temporal empires fall into decadence. So notice they're saying it's not like the despotic is against the earth, it's just simply a new movement. And it covers these two distinct things, right? A spiritual empire and, you know, Greece to Macedonia to so forth,
Yeah, and
or
and
Judaism to Christianity.
yeah,
Go ahead.
and the way there's sort of the paranoiac element, the knowledge of certain things, is also a big switch. If we go back to the primitive tribes, there may be seers or oracles of types, but there's no one who sort of places themselves in knowing the absolute truth, because that's not really a thing in the way that the sort of the way that social experiences are sort of manufactured inside of that. It's not a thing in that way. It's instead a lot of sort of mushy social interactions, as they talked about. It's not so much the plus and minuses written on a sheet. Married this person, married this person. We do that now because we can quantify it. But at the time, there's a lot of very particularized sort of interactions of debt to this person and not this moving around here, a lot more contingent connections, versus here, there's a push in a very different way. And they kind of end this, but I think it's worth going to this and then making it its way backwards. When we have this sort of absolute and totalized knowledge, this knowledge that links him directly to God and connects him to his people, this thing, which we can sort of, if we look back through history, or just think of how people call Queen Mum, for example, in the UK, as a very basic idea, where it's all of they are the thing, they are my lineage, they are my line back, they are the ones who know best. The idea of kingly knowledge or divine providence, or religious divine providence, and the examples of Christ or Moses or Muhammad or anyone else, this ability to just say, no, I'm the one who has the total alliance with God and affiliation through time. I am the one. And this is the paranoiac that is in charge. This is that thing. And the phrasing of desert paranoiac, JK, to kind of come back to your question, is not because you live in the desert. That's not really the point. The bush paranoiac also doesn't have to be in a bush. It's not the point. It's instead sort of how one exists and where one is. And a desert paranoiac in this sense is someone who is at the horizon. There is nothing there really. Like, there isn't a lot of formations that exist. They are the ones who are stating it, are at the edge. They are the ones doing the things. They're the ones who controls. the intersection of alliance filiation, installs himself at the limit, at the horizon, in the desert, the subject of this deterritorialized knowledge. This thing that is happening, this is the new push. Chiefs didn't have this. Seers didn't have this. This is not, the earth didn't even really have this. The earth didn't know everything. It was a lot more contingent. Here it's much more paranoiac knowledge reacting to it all, but being at the horizon and being connected to all of those things. I think it's just easier to start from that, because this is when they say the desert paranoiac, this is the paranoiac at the edge in the desert.
Yeah, I think it's important to qualify what knowledge is here, because it's really tricky, I think. Um, so like this sentence, right, the context, and they actually define what they mean by paranoia here, which is actually quite nice. They don't usually do this. So it is this force of projection, right? And this force of projection is basically the use of new alliance and direct filiation, right? That defines paranoia, the strength to start again from zero, to objectify a complete transformation. The subject leaps outside the intersection of alliance filiation, installs himself at the limit horizon in the desert, the subject of a deterritorialized knowledge that leads him directly to God and connects him to the people. So like this is, for me at least, this is the form of knowledge that's being used to talk about the second and third syntheses, right? Like notice that the the basis for this is the new alliance, the direct filiation, right? It's the disjunction itself, right? And that when we get to this point about limit in the desert, to me at least seems to be talking about territory. It's clearly referencing voluptus because it's the subject, right? So there's a link being made about how how the change in the disjunction is affecting how territories now function and where the subject um, is, so to speak, in that change, right? Because again, it's about a movement from the earth as opposed to something against the earth.
And it's, again, the way that this operates, because it's, again, as we're breaking this down, we're talking about an extraordinary superstructure of processes. We're not, again, talking about any particularized element when they say that it doesn't matter how many parts this thing has, how many elements of the alliance. That's irrelevant to this. It is the categories themselves that define this new setup and how they operate, the way that, and their example I love, it's even though, historicity or not, the story example is fantastic. Is that you got Pharaoh with all of the slaves and everything in the Old Testament, and he is the Godhead. He's the Godhead. What he says goes, and he gives edicts, and people ask him. Moses comes and asks all that. Moses leaves, and he becomes the Godhead. He does the thing. He installs himself in this way at that point, and he takes his Egyptian machine into the desert, but installs it there, gives his people this religious military organization, which is all accurate. It's the way this works throughout this. This is the form of production of these social groups and societies. The categories that demonstrate this new socius, this new alliance, and the filiative the direct filiation, they're not reducible. They are not the same as the primitive. And here we see this thing where the paranoiac kind of is defined and placed. To go back to what you were saying about how knowledge operates, or the kind of knowledge, we're not talking about someone who actually has all of the knowledge. We're also not talking about someone lying about having all the knowledge. It's not really that sort of thing. It's instead that they're placed in a position where there's this old joke about how the Pope is infallible. And so why wouldn't you take him to Vegas? Because he always knows what's happening. That is kind of actually how this operates. It's whatever he says is the truth. Doesn't matter like if he's right or not. That's not the point. It doesn't matter whether or not there is no like truth. It's whatever they say goes, and goes for his people. and it is broadcast and reiterated by his direct followers, his disciples, his perverts, who are going around and ensuring that his word is carried out. We'll get into how that happens, but it's kind of an important setup.
I'd venture we still want to be a little careful there because so I look the reference to Christ and his Saint Paul. So notice it's not Peter, it's Paul, right? Very true to Christianity, especially for Catholicism, right? So Paul is here highlighted as a pervert. So Jesus doesn't have any writings, right? And even with Moses, right? This point about the Ark of the Covenant is interesting for that line too. But to that end, right? Jesus can say he is the way, the truth, and the life, right? But what counts is how that's functional. And Paul's interesting because he picks up as not as one of the 12 disciples, right? And changes how Christianity largely will function. So this point about perversion, it's not even about interpretation. It's simply about the usage of the disjunction and the manner of speaking, right? Because at that level, right, the kind of, and the church kind of talks about it this way, right? Different denominations trace their lineage through different apostles to Christ, right? With Judaism, well, I'm not going to go into that because I'm not as well versed, but there's the tribes, right? Notice the usage of filiation that's being discussed there, and how in each case we're not looking for the overarching empire. We're kind of looking at, to this point they made earlier, right? Perceive the movement of this formation, right? So the socius, when one empire breaks away from a preceding empire. So notice we're looking at how there's a process of change and empires breaking with themselves, right? Christianity breaks with Judaism. Judaism broke with Egypt, so to speak, right?
Well, and it's, again, to talk about the line, his perverts. When we talk about the Bush paranoiac, think about these social interactions or the lived experiences of these things. Going out in the bush, there isn't a lot that you have to sort of take into account. It's literally the shit that's around you. You're doing the thing. You're hunting or whatever. When you return back, there's a lot to figure out. There's a lot of contingency to sort of make do with and to make operate. So the paranoiac doesn't return paranoiac and stay that way in the village. He has to deal with other people socially. He has to adjust and sort of deal with the sort of debt obligations and the movable blocks of debt as he sort of moves around. The way that this works is not drastically dissimilar. Here we have the desert paranoiac who is doing their thing, but then their perverts are, they talk about it as, and I think St. John is a great example as well, but Paul, who went out and like actually met with people and converted people, converted Jews, converted others. St. John, who actively undermined Judaism there's a lot of stuff that happened actually spreading the message, but the pervert line is the dealing with the sort of doing the thing rather than the paranoiac who's able to sort of just do the shit and be more, I don't know how to put it, totalitarian mentally, be more exacting. They give edicts. The pervert figures out how to make the edicts as close as possible or as they understand it. There's kind of a interaction there that you're talking about. I think that's a fair way to put it, Jack. No?
I mean, the hard thing is always how to understand the perversion, right? Because, yeah, to your point, it changes how it's going to be about changing how the flows are functioning, right? Or how the machines can function, right?
Well, it's
And
again,
that's what's kind of
but
tricky.
it's specific. It's the force of projection that defines paranoia. This is the thing that matters. It's the projection of it that defines the paranoia. The pervert, and again, I think we will get into specifically, but the nature of the pervert and how he plays is, first, it is that projection of the paranoiac, the social sort of particular formation and the investment directly in that. It doesn't matter, again, if he's a good or bad dude, a conqueror, a despot, a holy man, an anchorite. Any of this, it's almost irrelevant. The perverts, I wouldn't even say it's even the perverts. Like St. John, I think here he's talking about St. John as being the paranoiac, actually. Because it's again, he's the one doing the attack at the central doctrine of Judaism. He's the doctrine of alliance with God, the filiation that goes back to Abram. These things are being sort of torn apart by the paranoiac and his statements, and the perverts are the ones out in the world going from place to place, conquering on his behalf and spreading that. And this mobilization of it is what we're going to be getting into, because the codes and the inscriptions and the things that have to be dealt with by these perverts is part of that. It's one of the reasons that, I mean, we'll get into all this, but it's the sort of contingent outward reach that the imperial machine has. At least that's how I know it. Apparently you disagree, my friend.
Might be a slightly different reading, because I'm not coming at it from lived experience. So
Fair.
like for me, the projection is kind of like it's the socius doing the projection for me.
Yeah. All right. I'll stop for a second. Where would anyone like us to focus next, or questions on this paragraph? Because there's a lot said in here, and we really could go on for hours, and I really, really, really don't want to. I want to be able to keep moving at least a little bit as we do this.
Okay, this all seems so much more structured than and I don't mean structure in any kind of technical term. I mean, just seems that everything seems to be a lot more defined, like all the roles. And why do I always go to the Middle Ages? I don't know, but everything just seems to be, everybody has a role, and it's almost like there's a individually defined one job, one person sort of place for everybody. Instead of, like before, he said it was fluid. It wasn't an officially designated aunt, uncle, whatever for people. It was just, and now it's like, okay, you're 4 steps away from the power source, and you're 3, and you go over there, and you have 4 people under you, and they all have their little titles and jobs and so on. So it just
hierarchy. So one of the things that definitely separates, and we'll get into this again. So this is sort of like a mini version of it, but the nature of the switch is how power sort of worked in the primitive. Is it sort of didn't, like, I'm not saying that there was an influence that people wielded or this or that. It's less that as a thing, more when you owed people or you didn't, like you felt obligations and you sort of interacted in that way. But it's not Steve was in charge of things and everyone listened. With the despot, you are talking about straight up undisguised political power, like straight up. And we will get in deep to this, but the social dynamics of power and these things come into play here because of this. They're starting with the discussion around the paranoiac and the perverts, because it's important that we realize it's not just, oh, one guy is in charge. It's undisguised political power. Oh, that must be what the socius is. It's like, no. That's what's produced by the socius. That is an afterthought, as much as a cold is not a sneeze and the flu is not a vomit. The things are produced after. So the paranoiac and his perverts and the function of how they do knowledge and these things, these elements produce all of these other things. Now there's knock-on effects, there's ways that these interact, but one of those things is absolutely going to be this sort of very naked political power. Again, we're talking about one person who all the way through, suddenly the direct filiation is everyone. And the new alliance and direct filiation means everything kind of goes through this person. That gives them an extraordinary amount of power. But it's not the thing. It's not that they start with power and the rest of this follows. It's important to understand sort of the processes of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is that a fair way to put it, Jack?
Well,
I know,
replying in
I'm waiting.
Foucauldian terms,
Yeah, let's do it.
right? It's always a network of power,
Oh
and
yeah, of course.
that's the trick with a lot of post-structuralism, right? Because they're thinking, Foucault and Deleuze have that little interview, right, where it's about, we see theory and practice in terms of circuitry, not in terms of one or the other, right? It's a network, and I think that's what you're gesturing at, Brooks, right? Like
Yes.
this is a network involving power because power is created through the syntheses, right? So it's Foucauldian, it's relational. At the same time, it's funny because it's still filiation and alliance, right? I think the only reason it might look a little neater is because instead of doing like, right, so it's the line from the tribe to the, or the village, I guess, from the village to the town, which sounds like an album I own, right? So you're going from filiation alliance creating villages or groups to filiation alliance creating towns. And now it starts to look a little more familiar, right? You still have the same declension, the same kind of vertical filiation, the same horizontal alliance. But now what's changed is instead of tracing that through the earth, we're tracing that almost above the earth through through the despotic, right?
Yes. Well, I think it's also worth noting that, and it's specifically where I think, Lily, you were spot on, is it is a lot less messy in that sort of new, if I'm saying like, uh, if I were to just be dropped into a village in like myself, I'm not sure I'd be able to gauge like who kind of owed what or who had power over someone else or any of those. Like it's a lot of complex shit. I think here, I wouldn't necessarily be able to know everything about how everyone's doing, but I'd know who the king was, and I'd probably be able to pretty quickly ascertain who his main dudes were. And beyond that, like it's a lot less messy in that sense. So it's a lot, if that makes sense. I think that's fair, Jack.
Well, yeah, I mean, I get why it looks like it's cleaner because it looks more familiar now, right? Like I mean, where I live, we don't really have hunters. I mean, they do it for fun, but we don't have those kind of village. And this is that universal history kicking in, right? We're starting to see like some of that, I don't want to say progression, but that development into capital, where it starts to look kind of familiar. It's just I just want to keep that through line of filiation alliance because that declension, it's all three socii, right? So it's always going to be a part of that.
All right.
Just one little
Please,
thing when you were
please.
mentioning Saint John. Did you mean Saint John the Baptist or another Saint John?
I think it was St. John the Baptist.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the Baptist.
Okay.
I don't know the reference. It's to like a French book.
Oh no, what
It's 42.
Brooks was talking about a Saint John and saying how kind of revolutionary it was, and I wasn't sure
Not
which Saint John it was.
revolutionary. See, that's
Okay.
no, not revolutionary. It's a particular usage of this. It's that St. John himself created his own, effectively his own sort of empire. And that's kind of what they're getting at. The Pharaoh existed. Moses fled from the Egyptian machine, installed his new machine there, giving his people a religious military organization. St. John the Baptist attacked the foundation of Judaism, the doctrine of alliance with God through affiliation that goes back to Abram. He did these people are installing their own machinery in this sense.
Okay. Okay. I want to find out more about that. Thanks. It's interesting.
last note I wanted to make then, because this would be critical as we go, is at the bottom of the page. There's a relationship with pursuing. Here we go. And this holds true whatever the context of this mobilization, whether in relationship with pursuing empires or not, since throughout these vicissitudes, the imperial formation is always defined by a certain type of code and inscription that is in direct opposition to primitive territorial quotings. So that's probably going to sound like more than it is. What they're talking about, as we'll see, is like they're talking about what they'll call overcoding versus coding. We'll explain it when we get there. The only thing I wanted to highlight right here is notice that the inscription is, again with this theme, right? The inscription has changed with the new socius. So codification has changed. And yet, it bears a relationship of opposition to primitive codification. So notice there's a tension between code and what code will be in the despotic, which we'll go over when we get there.
All right. I may actually have to bounce here. I'm so sorry. I'm going to cut off myself early. I've got a work sort of emergency happening. If you guys want to keep going, you are more than welcome to. Otherwise, we'll have to pick this up next week. I hate to do that, and apologies, but it's the way life goes today, it seems. So apologies for that. We will see you all. I'll see you all next